am Deanna Springer.
And I'm Dana Casey with a fun Stitch It Sisters quilting technique and classic time-saving tips by Nancy Zieman.
First, let's take a look at the technique we're featuring today. We'll be sharing creative options for straight line machine quilting with Clover's Ultimate Quilt and Stitch presser foot. We'll be using Riley Blake shade fabrics, Pellon sew-in fleece batting, Sulky 12-weight blendable threads, Schmetz size 75 chrome quilting needles, OESD's curved embroidery scissors, and our Bernina B770 sewing machine.
I'm looking forward to exploring the many stitching options using my domestic sewing machine along with the Ultimate Quilt and Stitch presser foot.
Master straight line machine quilting on a domestic sewing machine with the Ultimate Quilt and Stitch presser foot. The presser foot has a built-in stitch alignment ruler for guiding rows of parallel stitching. It's ideal for parallel line straight stitching, top stitching, and straight line machine quilting. Achieve parallel line straight stitching with the adjustable guide that locks into place. The large polycarbonate presser foot glides smoothly over the fabric surface. Attach the presser foot to the sewing machine with a low shank ankle. If your machine requires a shank adapter, attach the shank adapter to the presser foot before attaching it to your machine. Move the ruler to set the distance between the needle and the alignment guide. The guide adjusts from 3/8 of an inch to 3 inches. The foot has a 1/4 inch seam allowance with a wide back for maximum feed dog grip. The presser foot stays on course and does not meander when encountering bulky seams. Align the guide to the previous marked line or previous stitching line. Before we can do our straight line machine quilting, we need to make a quilt. So we've made our modern mini quilt for the Great Wisconsin Quilt Show Mod Mini Challenge this year. We had fun just creating this fun Fusible art quilt. We've layered our quilt top with batting and backing. So we use the Pellon fleece, and you could use the Fusible fleece and fuse it to the back of your quilt top. That adds a lot of stability when you're, especially when you're working with a little art quilt. It completely stabilizes the fabric for the process. And then you could use, say, June Taylor's spray basting spray and adhere that backing fabric to the back of the batting, or in this case, Pellon fleece. Or you could choose to use pins or safety pins. Pin your layers together. These are Clover's Wonder Pins, and you just pin down with one hand, and you can place Clover's Wonder Pins on your project, and not to worry, the Ultimate Quilt and Stitch presser foot will clear those Wonder Pins
very good.
very nicely. We want to talk about straight line machine quilting, and the first technique I want to share is straight line machine quilting without marking a line. So you don't need to mark a line to do straight line machine quilting. Find a spot on your quilt, and for this block, this quilt, I've chosen the center seam. There is one straight line already on this quilt, so I'm using that, and I'll head to the sewing machine and stitch. With the Ultimate Quilt and Stitch presser foot, I just stitch right down that line. And then from the center of the quilt working outward, stitch back up along that stitching line.
Okay.
And you can set the guide for whatever measurement you'd like. And for this quilt, I just used the edge of the presser foot as the guide. And from the center outward, just did row after row after row of straight line machine quilting.
Okay.
We'll use this same quilt to show straight line machine quilting from one marked line. So let's bring that up and show. This is our Mod Mini finished, and we just have row after row of straight line machine quilting. But to do that, we mark one line. So we've marked one line on the quilt, and we just found one straight line. And I went to this block, this patch on the quilt, and I just draw a straight line. So right there, hold it, and then we mark one line. Now you could do it vertically. One of these we made, we'd stitched vertically, and one we've stitched horizontally. So once you've marked that line, then we'll pull the ruler away. That's one line. And you can do machine quilting down that line, again, working from the center out, turn the quilt and stitch up. So continue stitching row after row after row. And again, we use the edge of the presser foot as the guide.
Okay.
I really like those tight, close together stitches. I like a lot of quilting on my quilt, and it doesn't take any time at all to stitch all these lines. And we should talk about the thread we're using. When you want to do straight line machine quilting and you want the thread to show, choose something like a Sulky 12 weight. That's a blendable thread. It comes in many colors, and it's a variegated thread, and that's how we got the yellow and the pinks and the oranges on this stitching. If you had an intricate patchwork quilt that you want the patchwork to show, that's when I opt for a monofilament thread. So lighter colors, I use the clear monofilament thread, and darker colors, I use the smoke monofilament thread. If we were to use monofilament thread for this quilt, it wouldn't be the best choice. You wouldn't see the stitching so much. We like to see the stitching. I've lengthened the stitch length to a 3.0 and really let that thread make the machine quilting shine.
Yes.
So we'll move on to the next quilt. And the next mini quilt shows echo quilting. So we use the presser foot, the edge of the presser foot, and we've stitched around that center circle. So we just stitch around that circle each time, advancing the foot one row inward. So we're working from the outside in, and we're using this previous stitch line as the guide. So you wouldn't start in the middle of this quilt. We're breaking the rules.
Yes.
We're breaking the rules. Usually you quilt from the inside out, but you don't have a guide here. You do have a guide here. So straight line machine stitch all the way around and continue echo quilting. And you can do different quilting techniques in each of the shapes or each of the sections. Say you just wanted that to be bullseye quilting, you could do a different technique on the outside.
Okay.
But you can see we've stopped the stitching and we didn't stitch through that square.
Okay.
You could do back stitching. This one shows a back stitching. We've back stitched, but you can see the thread shines a little bit thicker. So what you could do is stitch and drop your needle and then cut your thread and leave a thread tail. So you have a 1-inch thread tail. Use clovers, snag repair needles, wrap that thread end around the needle, and then bury that thread tail into the quilt. It's not coming through the back of the quilt. You're burying it into the middle of the quilt.
Okay.
And that's how you have a seamless stitching line instead of a back stitching line. That's a telltale sign that you stop stitching there.
Right.
This gives the eye, the eye makes it think that stitching continues underneath there. So that is echo quilting. Just echo a design element in your quilt and stitch again and again and again the same distance between stitching lines.
Okay.
The next mini quilt shows curved piecing, or curved stitching rather. It's curved machine quilting. We start by using clovers, supersized 5-in-1 sliding gauge. And I'll let you hold that. And I know you were excited about this technique when I first showed you.
Yes.
The supersized 5-in-1 sliding gauge is also a circle marker. It's the usual 5/8 of an inch and 1/4 inch, and you use it as a marking ruler for quilting and sewing. But you also can depress the button, and I've stopped at the 2-inch marking, and then you mark. You insert your pen, and I just mark an arc. I just mark an arc.
Okay.
And then we take the 6-inch ruler, we'll take that away, and then we just put a 6-inch ruler and we extend that line. So to the arc, to the edge of the fabric, and from the arc to the edge of the fabric. And that gives us an arced or curved quilting. Who said straight line machine quilting had to be straight?
Who knew?
Right. So again, we have that one marked line. And we can stitch. We can stitch with the Ultimate Quilt and Stitch presser foot on each side of that line. It's straight line machine quilting, but it's a curved line. And as you stitch inner curves and outer curves, no problem for the Ultimate Quilt and Stitch presser foot. And on this quilt, I decided to advance the gauge 1/8 of an inch every time I stitch. So it's an outward stitch. The stitches become slightly wider apart as we work towards the edges of the quilt.
Okay.
So another way of straight line machine quilting, but not straight. The next quilt shows custom machine quilting. So on this Mod Mini, we decided to custom machine quilt each of the elements. And I like to show this tip with the Ultimate Quilt and Stitch presser foot. We used the foot as a guide and stitched the 1/4 inch edge of the foot gives you a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm a 1/4 inch in from the edge, but where do you stop?
Right.
You don't want to overstitch that or backstitch. So here's a classic time-saving tip by my longtime friend Nancy. Use painter's tape in the sewing room. And when I first stitched that first seam, I put a little piece of painter's tape and I apply it right to the presser foot. And that's a built-in guide.
Oh, okay.
When that painter's tape reaches the edge of the quilt, I stop with my needle down, I raise the presser foot and I pivot. And turn, sew the next seam, and then turn and do the next stitching line.
Okay.
So that painter's tape, if you were doing a 3/8 of an inch or half, could be repositioned.
Okay.
And it just sticks right inside the presser foot and it acts as a guide as you're doing echo quilting, or in this case, custom machine quilting. Straight Line Machine Quilting enhances your quilting projects. It's functional, melding all the layers together into one. And as we've shared today, it's an easy technique to master with great results every time.
I'm looking forward to trying Straight Line Machine Quilting on my next quilting project.
We hope you've enjoyed the Stitch It Sisters project. You'll find this pattern along with a limited number of bundle boxes at stitchitsisters.com.
Be sure to tune in again for another Stitch It Sisters sewing adventure.
In the meantime, connect with Stitch It Sisters and friends on our social sites. Stitch It Sisters is made possible by Bernina, Clover, Riley Blake Designs, OESD, Oklahoma Embroidery Supply and Design, and shopnzp.com.
Bernina, made to create.